Good evening and welcome to the Translation Capsules, free online talks on translation. Today we were supposed to count on the presence of Edward Wen, but there's been a problem. So what we'll do is I will interview Alan Runcieman, who's lecturer at the University of Vic, Central University of Catalonia, who is also an expert in translanguaging. Before I start, I would like to mention the organizations that have promoted this activity: ITISC, Tech for Word, Eumo Editorial, Institut Ramon Llull, the Spanish Association of Audiovisual Translation and Adaptation, the Spanish Association of Conference Interpreters, and the APAC, the Association of English Teachers of Catalonia. And of course, thank you all for joining us. If you want to follow us in Twitter or other social networks, remember that our hashtag is #ConversaTrat. If you have any questions, you can write them in the chat and we'll answer them at the very end of the conversation. So, good morning, Alan Runcieman.
Good morning, Katarina.
Perhaps we could start through with a general overview of your academic career and your specific areas of research and how they relate to interpreting and translation.
Yes, before we start completely, I just want to apologize to everybody. We obviously have a problem with contacting Hong Kong. It's a problem that we didn't anticipate, but they're 7 hours ahead and there might be some delay because of, I don't know, whatever problems they have in Hong Kong at this time. So perhaps, we don't know, perhaps our guest might arrive at some point, but in the meantime, we're going to have to fill in the gap, so to speak, and interview me instead. So I've been teaching in the field of interpreting and translation for over 20 years. I started in Italy in '97. I started teaching for the School for Interpreters and Translators in the University of Bologna. And there I was teaching various courses for the interpreters and translators. So eventually I became interested in the field of translanguaging. I thought it was, I feel it interested me because it was part of my life and something I actually experienced myself in the flesh. Because when we come on to talk about it, I think you'll understand what I mean by translanguaging. It's a thing that it basically creates, the idea is that up until now, many of us think of languages and interpreting translation in the sense of language A to language B. I mean, it's a classic. We find it still in many areas of programs for teaching, interpreting, translation. But things have become a little bit more complicated over the last 10 or 20 years with the advent of what we call superdiversity. Now, superdiversity is a concept that was brought to our attention academically by Vertovec in the beginning of the 2000s. And what he said was that, I'll quote this because I have the quote, it's a notion intended to underline a level and a kind of complexity surpassing anything that the country has previously experienced. Such a condition is distinguished by a dynamic interplay of variables among an increased number of new, small, and scattered multiple origin, transnationally connected, socially, economically differentiated, and legally stratified immigrants, which is quite a mouthful, I agree. But the idea is that we are now so much in a world of intercommunication globally that, and so much migration and integration, I mean, very many people of different cultures and languages, that assigning one country to one language is becoming more complex in the sense that we have multiple connections within countries that we live in, perhaps we emigrate to. We are connecting continually with our people back at home, or we're interconnecting with other communities within the national boundaries, so to speak, of our nation. So we have access to many different languages on a multilingual level, different levels of competency and ability. We have access to many multimodal aspects of the languages, gestures, intonations, and so on. And the complexity has got to a point now where we're starting to question the notion of one nation, one language as a means, as a pedagogical means to understand the future of what might be translation and interpreting. Because at the moment, if we think of you speak in one language and I translate into another, we are seeing or beginning to see in the research that there are more complications in this, that people are integrating their own language with other languages in the moment of speaking, that there's no longer a clear divide between the languages. And also, translanguaging in this sense captures some essence of the idea of creativity, because when you start to speak in a language, so to speak, you might find that you start thinking, have I invented a word here? Is that the right word in this context? Have I switched languages? The concepts become more confused as you become more integrated into different communities and different societies. So that was my interest. That was my what is going on here? What is the future of interpreting and translation in relation to this phenomenon, to this development in language? So that's my basic interest. When I came here to Spain,
Alan.
yeah.
No, thank you very much. It seems that Edward Wen could connect after all. So
Thank
we'd
God.
like to welcome Dr. Wen.
When I was
Alan, you are doing much better than me. Yeah, indeed.
I was anticipating some of my questions to you.
Oh my God. But actually, I have been waiting. I mean, my friends as well are waiting for to log in. Okay, for 15 minutes. Also, there may be some problems. So you see, I don't know what happened. But anyway, yeah. So I think my friends are already in as well, I think. But you're doing a good job. I want to listen to your to you talking about it, right, Alan? And thank
You're
you,
very kind. You're very
Katerina.
kind.
Yes.
Well, I think we're now going to turn our focus on you, Edward, because I think
Oh,
this is what we're interested in. I'm very interested in specifically as well. So
yeah.
let me start by let's start again, so to speak, by introducing Edward Wen, who's a very, very well published, highly prestigious publications in the field of psycholinguistics and cognitive sciences in relation to language acquisition and translation and interpreting. Currently, he is a professor at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. And among these publications that he's published, one of them was actually with myself and Dr. Lily Han, very recently in 2023, entitled Interpreting as Translanguaging. And I'm going to come to that because I think that's an interesting book to consider with relation to research in the field. But before I do that, perhaps we could just have a general overview of your academic career, Edward, and your specific areas of research and how they relate to interpreting and translation.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. So very nice to see you again, right? I mean, it's our second or third time, but since our joint publication of the book, Wonderful Memory, right? So I was trying to grab a copy of the book. You still keep that book, right? Yes.
Yes,
Because
of course.
I moved my apartment, okay, and everything was packed. You can imagine. So too bad I don't have a copy, but you can show it to us later, right? So thank you for the invitation. I mean, I felt very excited to be able to talk to you and to talk to colleagues. I think colleagues are from everywhere. Am I right? So they are from Spain, from Italy, from Hong Kong, from China, from different parts of the world. So I feel very honored and pleased to have this nice conversation with you. I mean, old friends are getting together again. What better things to do? So for myself, I mean, this is I think my 25th year already as a teacher, right? So I was born in southern part of China. If you've been here, okay, is in the southern tip of China, Guangdong province, which is actually just close to Hong Kong. So I got my first degree and second degree, I mean my bachelor and my bachelor in English education in South China Normal University. So I was trained to be a teacher, English teacher. And then I did get my first job as a teacher, okay, teaching senior high school in a nice seaside city in Zhuhai for 1 year, 1998. And then I went back to Guangzhou, the capital of Guangdong province, Guangdong University of Foreign Studies, and got my master's degree. So that was when I began to do translation and interpreting, okay, because I learned business English as my, to be more exact, is what we call ESP, right? English for Specific Purposes in 1999 to 2002. So I got this degree and I was involved in doing a lot of translation for listed companies in Hong Kong. And so I earned some money in those days when China just joined the WTO, okay? Everybody was excited, a lot of opportunities, okay? So that was the golden days when I was in Guangzhou. But then in those days I was teaching business English, okay? Business writing. I still remember I have a lot of opportunities to teach this business English certificate 2. Okay, BEC2, which was mainly training corporate staff to write professionally. There was one case, okay, the first job I did for translation was, I remember it very clearly. I'm still talking about this case when I am a teacher to my new students. So I translated this corporate, what would they call, the speech for a chairman of a corporation. Okay, I was the first guy to do it. I mean, I was a MA student earning some pocket money, but then they have 7 QC people to look at my translation. You know what they say? They said, this guy has very good English, but not professional. Okay, so I realized there is a way in terms of translation for the business. So from that time on, I took that as my research area and my research interest in translation and interpreting. And I analyzed discourse analysis, right? Annual reports in terms of Chinese and English, etc. So the linguistic features. So I was a great follower of what we call genre analysis in discourse analysis. So that was my first part in Guangdong. Then I set up my own school actually in 2002. But in 2003, SARS, right, came, and nobody was allowed to come out to join my so-called training center. So I went out of business to some extent. So I think, oh, this is not a good job. Okay, so I quit it and came to Hong Kong. So that's where I met my supervisor, Peter Skian. You graduated from King's College. Is it King's College?
King's College, yes.
Yeah, King's College. So to some extent, we are connected, right? So I was very excited to know that, right? So Peter used to be teaching there. So he is a famous expert. He's the real expert. He's the real hero. Okay, now at his in his 80s. Okay, we just had a conversation the other day. Okay, also like this. So very excited conversation. So I came to Hong Kong. And under Peter's influence, I converted to psycholinguistics, second language acquisition, task-based language teaching. So all these, okay, are very exciting areas. So I completely changed my research interest from discourse analysis, translation to psycholinguistics. I became very, very interested in working memory. So our ability to store and to process the information in our brain at the same time, right? So this is my research interest for the past 20 years. And but more broadly, I was interested in language aptitude. What are some of the what we call cognitive abilities that allow us to learn language faster, more efficient, easier, okay, than our peers, given the same situation, given the same condition. So that was my major area. And I proposed this idea. Working memory can be a central component of language aptitude. So that combines, okay, my research area, task-based language teaching, because I look at the students' working memory capacity, looking at their performance, and then I correlate their performance with their working memory capacity. So that was my PhD research area. And then after I graduated from Hong Kong, CHK in 2007, I began to work as a full-time faculty staff and taught at the Hong Kong Xi'an University, a private university, the very first private university in Hong Kong for 7 years. So teaching applied linguistics, translation, psycholinguistics, second language acquisition, all those courses that are normally seen in English departments, right? But then in 2014, I went to Macau. Okay, so Macau is just 2 hours. Okay, 1 hour by ferry. I mean, counting all together is 2 hours from Hong Kong. Okay, so I spent 8 years working in Faculty of Languages and Translation. That's where I developed my new research area, which is translanguaging, because as you mentioned just now, with Professor Lily Han, okay, and one of our PhD student, Philomena, actually she's also here. Okay, so later we can bring her to the talk as well. She has done most of the work. Okay, I was the guy who was coordinating a lot of work, because they have been doing we were kind of interested in publishing papers. Okay, and then Professor Li Wei from King's not King's College this time, UCL. Peter is now at UCL as actually. So Professor Li Wei is in yes, UCL, and he is interested. He has produced a lot of papers, books on translanguaging. I mean, I know Li Wei for many years, but I never got to seriously read his work until I was in Macau. So, and then once you read it, oh my God, this is interesting. The more I read it, the more I got interested in translanguaging. I could say for now, most of 70% of my research are related to translanguaging rather than working memory and language aptitude. So we will produce a lot of things, and together we also produce this book, right? We wrote this book on translanguaging, and so we argue that the translation can be considered from a translanguaging perspective. So that is where we met each other and spent happy time writing the book, and still nice memory. So that basically wraps up my 25 years of as an English teacher. So the question is, now that I'm traveling between all among the 3 different areas of what is now the center of China's economic powerhouse, we call it Greater Bay Area. So actually, I've been walking around, okay, and working around as well, okay, the Greater Bay Area. So I call myself, okay, the Greater Bay Area guy, okay, on the one hand. On the other, I don't know. So when sometimes you ask, where are you from? So I'm from Guangdong, I'm from Hong Kong, I'm from Macau. So it seems to me that who am I? So that is the big question. So when I was in Guangdong, I speak Mandarin. When I was in Hong Kong and Macau, I speak English and Cantonese and Mandarin. So it is all speaking to me that I am a translanguaging, okay, person. So that's why in my upcoming, just now I was trying to log in another I'm going to give another talk, which says in search of translanguaging self. Okay, so in other words, like now I'm talking to you, right? So I'm using English. Even though I'm using English, my Chinese are come on, use me. They are activated in my head, so I'm sure. So how many languages do you speak, Alan? I'm sure. So I have developed this saying that, I mean, every one of us is a kind of translanguaging person. So that is something, in other words, it is what we are using our multilingual, multi-semiotic, and multimodal, right, ways to communicate, to convey our meaning.
Edward,
Exactly what
can
we
I
are
just
doing,
jump in
right?
here and
Yeah.
let's clarify a few things here,
Okay.
because not everybody knows what translanguaging is. I gave a very rough and very rushed introduction before you
Right.
came on. But some people would say, multilingualism, okay, you speak different languages at different levels, code switching, you switch between one language and another. what is different about translanguaging? Why has it become a paradigm? What is the difference in the concept? I think if you could just clarify that for us, it might be really helpful.
Right. So I mean, code switching, for example, you're looking at the switching of languages, okay, but it's still languages. While translanguaging, it is what we call top down, right? So it is a transcend, right? So it transcends the boundaries between the named languages. When you're talking about co-mixing, you're still, I mean, people, and not we are, right? So people are still talking about the named languages, as they say. But when we are talking about translanguaging, it is transcend. It is so like actually we are translanguaging. So it is, although we we are still using English, Chinese, but to some extent it is the transcending of the linguistic boundaries. It's not the named language, number one. So in other words, this is important as we are in a second language acquisition. You and me, right, are both in most of our research. So it is more native, like or native speaker. So in translanguaging, come on, okay. So we should be equal, right? So both languages or all languages. So in that case, we are not calling them languages. We are calling linguistic resources. So in the recent paper, they call it our mother tongue is not just our L1. It is a repertoire. It is part of our linguistic repertoire. So this is more top down, okay, level. So this is a ideological concept. So it makes us have get rid of this what we call monolingual mindset. So that is the power. As I said just now, okay, actually it fits my life. It speaks to my life, right? So translanguaging. So I don't know whether I'm Chinese because I actually speak more English than Chinese. I mean, although I'm Chinese, of course, but sometimes it's difficult to have this clear line. So it is that sense, in that sense, that is more powerful and a more encompassing concept. So that is why I like it.
I think we've got lots of things in common here because, I mean, I myself, I'm obviously English speaker, but I lived in Italy for 20 years. My Italian language is near perfect, but I also lived in an area of Italy which had a dialect, and I picked up a lot of the dialect from that area. Then I came to Spain, and I picked up, obviously I learned Spanish, and I worked for university in Catalonia, and I'm learning Catalan, and my Catalan sort of like mixes with my Spanish and perhaps a bit of Italian. And this whole idea of this notion of clear boundaries between languages is challenged by the translanguaging concept, I think, because basically what it's saying is that in the situated moment of communication, depending on your objective in that particular moment, who you're talking to, who your interlocutors are, and what parts of your linguistic or all your repertoire is fired in that moment. You can't separate it out into very simple, defined, what we might call national languages. That we find ourselves in a sort of a melee of a mix, and again, this feeds into notions of cognition. How do you think? I mean, people think I think in English, or I dream in Spanish, or this idea that the languages in some way are separable in the cognitive activity that we engage in. But I think translanguaging speaks to us in the sense that it says it's not that simple. You access all of your multimodal linguistic repertoire in that particular moment, and depending on the situation, you will source more from one or the other, or whatever happens. Somebody comes into the room from a different culture, and you'll access that again, and you're constantly in a sort of sometimes we talk about translation as being a bridge, but I think we come to the conclusion that it's not so much the bridge, it's the river underneath. It's the current, it's the flow of language and understanding that is constantly bashing against the banks. It's constantly mixing in the middle. It's like I'm going to cross the bridge from LA to LB, but in the middle is this river of communication, of language, of culture, of so many experiences we've had, personal experience as well, because language is not just it's to do with personal experience, history, personal history, the way that we've moved in and out of cultures, the way that we've fallen in love. Let's not get too romantic, but we fall in love with people in different languages, different cultures. We meet with their family. We're constantly in this sort of this current, so to speak. So that's my best way of coming at the concept of translanguaging. But then it comes to the problem, perhaps the challenge, let's call it the challenge, when it comes to translation and interpreting. Is there already, or will there be a future challenge to interpreting translation if it continues this monolingual, very, very sort of like 1 equals 1 exchange, like a bridge, or is there any future in incorporating concepts of translanguaging into our communication? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think yeah, that's why we argue for this what we call paradigm shift, right? So that people get to understand that. So that's why we are arguing that translation, in essence, is translanguaging, right? Because it is the what you said just now, right? The use of all our multilingual, multimodal, multisemiotic resources to make meaning, to convey meaning. So that's important. Number one, for example, when you are doing interpreting, so you are not just listening to the linguistic cues, right? You are also looking at your gesture, and you're looking at, so you're nodding, you are responding, so all these are part of our resources to receive or to give, right? So that helps us to, last semester I was in Macau, okay, as a visiting fellow, and I listened to a talk, okay, about multimodal, okay. So and to some extent, the neuroscientists, they say that actually 70% of our knowledge are coming from multimodal rather than linguistic. It makes sense, right? We are the strange group, we are the linguists, right? But looking at others, most of the time we are relying on other multimodal, multi-semiotic, right, ways to learn, or even sensory motor, right, learning, what we are calling now the embodiment, right, embodied understanding. So that is important. So in other words, in translation training, for example, we are not just training you to do the linguistic. So in our book, in our model, right, so we call it the 3M. The 3M stands for, okay, the first M stands for micro. It is the narrow, it's the brain base, it is the neural base, it is a cognitive base, right? While the second M is what we call meso. Meso is our interaction with the machine, with our affordances, and nowadays with digital devices, and with our dictionaries, etc. Right? So these are the second level. And the third level is what we call the ideological. It is the social cultural milieu, or the context that are shaping us. So all these areas are shaping our performance in doing translation. So hopefully we understand it in this way, it might help us, okay, to have a better way to do translation or to conceptualize translation. So in this, what we call through this translanguaging lens, okay. So hopefully that will be helping the field to move forward. Nowadays, look at, later we are going to talk about AI, hopefully. So they have multimodal, multilingual, are doing better than those single or monolingual, okay, AI model or large language models. So that would be also part of the story. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to come on to AI, and I think it's one of these areas now that is just all dominant. You need to always address the not so much the elephant in the room, but the room, which is AI.
It's affecting everybody, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But before we do that, I think I just want to point out something perhaps to our listeners that they're not quite aware of, because in Macau, the Portuguese is one of the official language in Macau.
Yes.
Or yes. So
official language.
You've got a situation in Macau, which is like you can have bilinguals or multilinguals that are using not only Chinese but also Portuguese or words of Portuguese origin and so on. I'm sure there's a bit of creativity as there is in all these situations. And our research, well, your research, which was in our book, was about how, under moments of pressure in interpreting situations, how the students activated these two very different linguistic and cultural and social cultural languages in the moment of being under pressure to interpret. And I think that's a really interesting part of the book. So perhaps you could just give us a quick idea of what was going on there. What did your research reveal to us?
So it is a still ongoing project actually. So we also in our book is mostly our call for paradigm shift. So it is so a lot of empirical work still waiting. So but I mean in terms of now that bring us to what we call research methodology, right? So in terms of research methodology, one of the key, the most original or standard way of investigating translanguaging is moment analysis. And moment analysis is what Professor Li Wei has mentioned, that because in that very moment, if we identify a certain moment when you are doing translanguaging, so you will be able to find out how the multilingual speakers, right, would use different multilingual, multimodal, multisemiotic resources to make meaning. And in that, what we call now we have a second term, right? Translanguaging space. So if you put your brain as a translanguaging space, for example, you consider it as a space. So it is where our multilingual, multimodal, multisemiotic resources are being utilized to make meaning. So this is a translanguaging space. So in that space, you can identify how multilingual learners or speakers are using this very creatively, very critically. In other words, they are going to mix all these languages. I mean, it's not just mix, right? It is really transcends. So a lot of creativity will come out. All the Chinese, for example, for our speaker, Cantonese. So actually in Macau, to be more exact, I mean, I am only speaking two or three, not Portuguese actually. So in Macau, it is a bilingual, but I'm not a Macau citizen. They never gave me this citizen. Okay, I'm a Hong Kong citizen. Okay, but anyway, if you are speaking Portuguese, okay, so you know Portuguese, and Chinese are the two official languages, but very few people are able to. I mean, if you want to be a civil servant, or if you are a civil servant, you should learn Portuguese. But most of the general public, they are not able to speak Portuguese actually. So English is Chinese. Most of them are Cantonese, similar to Hong Kong. Okay, the native language is Cantonese, and then they learn Mandarin, 普通话. So the language that is mostly spoken in the mainland, and then English for international communication, and then Portuguese. So these are the four languages that are spoken. I mean, there are many other smaller numbers of speakers with other languages, but basically this is the situation. So we try to look at that, moment, when they are using the languages, but this is our hypothesis. We are not a neuroscientist. We can open the brain and see what is happening. So what we do is, because I come from, as you like, you know, right? We come from second language acquisition. We also have what we call in second language acquisition, pause analysis. So when you're doing interpreting, there are two key elements that we are interested, particularly the two extremes. One extreme is when everything comes to what we call the flying moment. So translanguaging takes effect. You don't know which languages you are using. This is the highest level. So translation interpreting becomes automatic. And you use it very natural, very implicit. It becomes part of this flying moment. We call it the peak performance, right? So that is exciting moment, okay? And we haven't, I mean, I've only got this idea, but haven't got interesting moments there yet. The second moment is when you are struggling. So when you're doing interpreting, so we identify the longest pauses. So we are both from a psycholinguist. So psycholinguists are strange people, right? When you want to see how healthy somebody is, you don't look at how healthy they are, right? You look at how sick they are. You look at their sickness. You look at, so when we want to look at how fluent you are, we don't look at how fluent you are. Yeah, we do look at how fluent, but more interestingly, we try to see where did you pause, right? So where did you stop? So we try to look at the long pauses and try to see what happened that stops them from producing the language, from interpreting. So those are what we call, that fits very well for this moment analysis, pause analysis. That's why we argue, I mean, in terms of research methodology, okay, moment analysis or pause analysis, because that relates to our second language acquisition, second language speech. I mean, towards the end of speaking is second language to some extent, right? Is L2 speech. Okay, so that's why we are borrowing this research method from second language acquisition and try to identify how do people pause, where do they pause. Now, this reminds me of I mean, this is a different story in second language acquisition, right? So I'm interested in chunking, working memory. So for example, how do you do is one chunk for a native speaker or for a high level or high proficiency speaker. But for low proficiency, where do they pause? They pause within the phrase, within the boundary, right? So they pause, how do you do? I mean, it's possible for them to pause there, but for native speaker, it is what? It is how do you do is one chunk. So that is something we are trying to look at. So moment analysis, pause analysis are two very interesting way for us to look at the translanguaging high moment or peak moment and the struggling moment. So that allows us to do this. Yes, that was it. Some of the story.
And when you were doing the analysis of the research you did, the area you were looking at, one of the areas you were looking at was note taking, the consecutive interpreting, and you purposely put in stressful elements that would cause problems for the translation from Chinese to English. No, was it?
Right.
Most of it.
Right.
And the students in that moment, they were under. You knew that you were putting them under a lot of cognitive pressure to produce, and you focused in on that particular pause, the long pauses where you knew that this was going on, and you observed the note taking processes. Mm-hmm. Because there were camera snatches of the note taking processes, and I found it very interesting that they started to multimodal. They would use Chinese symbols or Cantonese symbols. They would introduce a word from Portuguese, peixe, and then they would introduce a dollar sign, and then they would introduce. So they were constantly multimodal, multilinguistically manipulating, trying to get the information down on the paper in order to carry on with the process of the consecutive. I found that was particularly interesting with regards to translanguaging and its multimodal aspect as well. No?
Exactly. Yeah, that's why after that, I became very interested in another idea. Actually, is what I call, or what Li Wei has called originally translanguaging space. So just now we say our brain can be considered translanguaging space, and now we have these notes, right? Note taking. The notes are translanguaging space. In that space, it is, as you very vividly described, okay, yeah, all these symbols, words. So, and you will see they are everything, right? So this is exactly what we meant by translanguaging space, translanguaging. So symbols, words, I mean, anything that allows you to make meaning, and you're going to jot it down and then use it to, yeah, to interpret meaning. So that is, yeah, that is interesting. So our brain can be translanguaging space, our notebooks can be translanguaging space, and a lot of the posters can be translanguaging space. So I'm seriously considering a special issue on devoting to translanguaging space. And I'm calling for papers. I mean, if the audience have interesting papers, do write to us. Okay, so I'm seriously considering proposing this special issue. What can be considered translanguaging space? So that is a very, very interesting topic. And
absolutely,
notes for interpreters are definitely best example for representing translanguaging space. Yeah.
Before we finish, I think we're under pressure now to have a Q&A session. Let's bring in a little bit of AI. Can we give us a little idea of how you're working in the field now with regards to W translation and translanguaging through the lens of AI?
Exactly. Good. So in our recent line of development of research, I work with mostly is done by Philomena, who is in the audience. Later we can bring her up. Okay. So we are using what we call digital language portraits as a translanguaging space. So language portraits, meaning it's a body shape to ask our multilingual speakers to identify. For example, I'm speaking Chinese, English, Cantonese, Mandarin, and French, and Russian, for example. We ask our informants to identify, or to some extent to put the different languages into different parts of the body. So we are asking them, for example, how many languages do you know? And then could you put each of the languages into different parts of your body and tell us why you are putting that language there, for example, and then when are you using that language? So through this language envelope or language portrait, okay, we are asking them to understand themselves, number one. Number two, and we are asking them to reflect on their multilingual, or what we call pluralistic, right, use of the different multilinguals, right, multi-languages. So, for example, they are speaking, like myself, for example, my home, I speak Cantonese. At school, I speak English to my students. Okay, with you, I speak English, and then with my friends from mainland China, I speak Mandarin, for example. So it reflects the multiple languages that they are using in their lived experiences. So through these language portraits, we understand them better, right? So that's why I call it a multilingual self. This is one way. In the past, we asked people to do it. I mean, they ask people, researchers ask them to draw, right, on the paper, but digital. We move it to become digital. We set up a digital platform where they can use the electronic pen to draw it, okay, to draw the different parts of the body with the different indication of the different languages they are using. And then we use digital calculation. So in other words, for example, you put Chinese here, you put English there, Russian there, and we are able to accurately calculate how much percentage, how many percentage, okay, of you belong to Chinese, how many percentage belong to, it's, remember, this is digital, exact, and you don't know when you're drawing, right? So actually okay, we say, Alan, okay, you're 20% Spanish, okay, Spanish speaking, right? 20% English, for example. So they say, oh, that's me. So through these digital language portraits, you get to understand yourself better. Okay, so this is the first step. The next step, I mean, we just finished submitting the project is robotic. So we are going to use this. So this is what we call digital language portraits as a translanguaging space, number one. The next step is we're going to use it as a pedagogical tool. So through this tool, you will identify your strengths and your weaknesses. So because, for example, I would say Chinese is running in my blood. Okay, for example, so in the blood, how are you going to do that? That is robotic. So next time we are going to make our robots, okay, and we ask people to put the different languages into different parts of your body, and we are going to measure the forces that you are using when you're writing the different languages on different parts of your body. For example, I'm writing Chinese with all my forces. I'm a Chinese. Okay, and then English, come on, okay, it's just English, just for business, or just for money.
My little finger.
Yeah, that's the little finger. So you get to know who you are. So that is the argument. We are a translanguaging self. So that is digital, and what we call is embodied, right? Cognition. in the real sense. That's why I become very interested in this idea. And I just finished writing this project and asking the Hong Kong government for over $1 million to investigate, because we need to build this. It is digital language portraits, or now it has become digital and robotic language portraits. So DRLP. Yeah, looking forward to our product. Yes, to our app.
Right.
So we're going to apply for patents with this DRLP, because language portraits, a lot of researchers have done it, particularly with kids, multilingual kids, refugees kids, right? But now we move it to digital, and now next step we are moving it to digital and robotic. And that answers the very fundamental question of a philosophical question: who am I? So that's why in my next talk with organization in Chartered Institute of Linguists in the UK, right, Hong Kong Society. So I'm going to in search of my translanguaging self. Okay, so this is the next step, right? So that is something very looking forward to.
I think what you're talking about with self is so much part of translanguaging as well. The whole concept of like coming out of the ecological perspective of Van Leer, the idea that we're not just language producing machines. We're living in an environment that we're constantly interacting with our environment in so many different ways that we're not even unaware of most of them. Our balance, our sense of orientation, everything around us, and translanguage is not just what comes out of our mouths. It's every aspect about who we are, ourselves, our sense of identity. And again, when we go back to the nationalistic arguments and so on, you're Chinese because you speak Chinese. Oh, you're English because you speak English. And these sort of slightly monolithic, fossilized ideas about identity are shifting, I think. And one of the arguments of translanguaging, it's philosophical, let's say, or it's conceptual arguments, is that we're shifting away from the idea that one language, one nation, one culture, that we are much more interactive with the world through globalization, through movement, through migration, through interrelations and so on a massive scale, that we are more than just one language, one culture, and one boundary that tends to be promoted still in language acquisition, as you know well, monolingual position about, you want to learn English, you need to learn this is the box, this is what you need to incorporate, as opposed to embracing the variety of everything you've had and experienced in your life. By the way, we're getting too philosophical, I think
it becomes philosophical. That is exactly our next question. Who am I, right? I'm a multilingual self. I'm a translanguaging self. That is my first time using it in my next talk. Yeah.
I think Katerina wants to step in and give us a few questions from the audience.
Okay.
Thank you both. Thank you both very much. It was really interesting. We have a couple of questions or comments. So when did the concept of translanguaging first get proposed?
Good questions. That is everybody, whenever we write that paragraph, we need to mention it. And so actually it comes from Welsh, right? So in the early 1990s, okay, it was bilinguals. Yeah, people in Welsh, they are encouraged to use both Welsh and English in the classroom. But then later in 2000, Colin Baker, introduce this idea to apply linguistics, and it became very popular. And then the more we got to know, and then the more popular it becomes. And then Professor Li Wei and in UCL and Professor Ophelia Garcia from New York University, they are the two major components. But there are many other different scholars from all over the world are interested in doing it. So it was in the early 1992 or 1990, right? That the book, is a PhD thesis, and it was not the word itself, translanguaging the word. It was introduced by Colin Baker for bilingual studies, in 2000. So that is where it comes from.
Yes, I mean, everybody who writes anything about translanguaging has to quote the work of St. Williams, 1994, I think.
1992.
It was unpublished.
Yeah, the PhD thesis. Yeah.
It was a PhD thesis that was unpublished, so you basically got
Right.
exam everywhere, and it's just PhD thesis unpublished. But it led to quite a revolution, so to speak. But again, within the field of applied linguistics and learning languages and so on, it's been a theme that's been constantly through many years, back to the 80s with Cummings. I mean, Cummings introduced in his seminal work about the idea of independence theory, the idea that languages are not separate boxes, that we're constantly using the same cognitive roots to feed into different languages. So there's some sort of commonality among languages. And then you get the ecological perspective with Van Leer in the early 2000s, saying we're part of the environment and we're constantly being influenced. But probably the most important work was Vivian Cook's multi-competence, which came in 2015, 16, or whatever.
16.
Multi-competence. So he said, it's not just, there's no such thing as a major language and a minor language and a third language and a fourth language. They're all part of us, and they get activated in different ways depending on the circumstances in which we are interacting or communicating. We have more competence, but not necessarily we use that language more in those particular situations. So there's a lot of history behind translanguage. It's not something that just popped up with a PhD thesis. It's been there in the background, and the PhD thesis sort of like gave it a little push. The idea that you could read in English and respond in your own language. And again, as we know that Ophelia Garcia in America, Columbia University, has been pushing for more multilingual stroke translanguaging activities in the classroom with Latino children who are limited in their ability to express themselves because they have to express themselves only in English in the classroom under the sort of the American educational system. She says, no, these children are young, they're formative. You can't say you're inferior, basically, because your dominant language isn't American English or whatever. So there's a lot of history behind this. Sorry to waffle on there. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Katarina.
Okay, sorry, I lost them. There's another comment saying that translanguaging is rather subversive because it promotes mixing languages and knocking down barriers between languages. Would you agree with that?
Edward?
Yeah, I think it is as I said, it is a top-down concept, right? It is transcends languages. It's just, it is, I mean, physically you can understand it as a mixing of all these, right? But it's something new when everything is bigger than, I mean, as they say, right? So the final results are bigger than the adding up of the different parts. So it's something beyond it already. It's something completely new. So that is something it advocates for. So it is no named boundaries. So I mean, you can see the different mixing, right? But then that is a physical mixing. But then on the conceptual level, it is something higher. So it is transcend, as you can see from the word, right? It is beyond. It goes beyond the different languages. So it is not just mixing, it is going beyond the mixing. So that is something we need to bear in mind as well. So that's why, to some extent, it gives us the license, right, to be proud of our mother tongue, of who we are, right? That is important. In the past, for example, in Hong Kong, I mean, maybe in many different parts of the world. So, for example, when people are speaking the mother tongue or are speaking English in not a very good way, for example, they will say, oh, this is broken language. But that is, I mean, you give them, this is communication, this is meaning making. So this is translanguaging. So in other words, like Ophelia Garcia, right? So those kids, right, in New York, right, they are speaking Spanish, they are speaking different minority languages, but their mother tongue should be treated as equal. So that's something that the mindset, the ideological are different. So yeah, that is my response. Maybe Alan would have something to add. Yeah.
No, I agree. Again, we tend to lump things in. We say, Latin America, they're going to speak Spanish. No, they have many languages in Latin America. So you might get children coming from various areas of the continent that have their own dialects or even their own languages, which they then integrate into the classroom. So they might be picked on by the Spanish, let's say Castellano, Spanish-speaking students who go, what's that? What language are you using? This is not Spanish, not even Spanish. So you get this sort of constant sort of like, you know, your language is inferior to mine and so on. And so the idea is it's supposed to transcend, as Edward said, it's supposed to lift us up. I mean, it might be a little bit, some people accuse translanguaging a little bit more like, you know, evangelical, hallelujah, we're going to save the world. But it's not really that. It's about trying to raise awareness about the potential that we have when we don't constantly put ourselves into boxes and constantly say, this is, you know, this is a language, this is a culture, we think and we move through the world in much more complex ways. So I think it raises that debate up a bit further through this aspect. But yeah.
Indeed, yeah.
Katarina?
Okay. Thank you for clarifying this point. I think meaning making is like the fact that you focus on meaning making. I think that that really makes us understand. Well,
yeah.
Thank you both, Dr. Edward Wen and Alan Runcieman, for this inspiring talk. I'd like to remind you all that the next capsule on artificial intelligence will take place on March the 6th, and I hope you can come and join us too. Thank you very much.
Indeed. And it will be in Spanish, right?
In Catalan.
In Catalan. Oh, okay. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. Exactly. So thank you very much for the invitation and for this nice talk. And so very glad to see you, Alan, again, and to meet, Catalina. Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent.
And
thank you so much, Edward. It's a very interesting topic.
We will keep in touch. By the way, for audience who are interested in translanguaging, you can, of course, you can read my own stuff. But one particular article that I want to promote, to ask you to read is Professor Li Wei's, published in 2018, right? Translanguaging as a practical theory of human communication. That has been cited over 3,000 times. So since 2018, since its publication. So that would be something for you to, for audience, if you are interested, that would be a very interesting reading to do. Yeah, thank you.